impossible to know what kind of power was brought into play at the epicenter. Trees standing here were split in two, suggesting that the pressure came from above, but this does not indicate the power of the pressure. This is the wall of the penitentiary, 350 meters from the epicenter. Three-quarter-inch bars inside the concrete were torn by the tension. The power which tore these bars are only a small expression of the enormous power of the blast. The structure of the Urakami Cathedral 600 meters from the epicenter did not simply collapse of itself. Before it collapsed, the entire cornerstone slipped out of position by 8 centimeters. At the Mitsubishi Steel and Arms Works, 800 to 1500 meters from the epicenter, all structures which took the blast on their side completely fell over. However, the factory which stood lengthwise to the blast still stands on the ground. Only the iron sheets which were put up around the building were blown off, and the frames were unaffected. The difference between the two buildings is roughly the extent to which the structures could withstand the blast until the iron sheets had been torn off. A simple example indicating the power of the blast was found in this wall at the Yamasato Primary School, 700 meters from the epicenter. 152 centimeters in height, 822 centimeters in length, and 12 centimeters in thickness, this concrete wall jumped over 2 trees and moved out of place, as shown here. It instantly moved 5 meters to the rear, 400 centimeters at the left end, 610 centimeters at the center, and 565 centimeters at the right end. In the cemetery in the hills to the rear of the Urakami Cathedral, several tombstones were knocked down. Among them, there was just one left standing on its foundation. This indicates that the blast had approached its maximum limit of effectiveness. This graph shows the measurements of the size of the tombstones and the extent to which they moved out of position. This water tank on the roof of the Mitsubishi Ordnance Plant, 1,300 meters from the epicenter, is situated some 30 meters above the ground. It was bent by the blast, and the welded portions were cracked, as seen here. As the epicenter at Nagasaki is surrounded by hills, an examination of them should provide an answer as to the effects of the blast at higher altitudes. The summit of this mountain, Inasa, is 280 meters high. The distance from the epicenter, 2,350 meters. Shacks on the summit collapsed in the manner shown here. Except one shack built after the bombing, all buildings on the summit were blown down. In other words, the blast was no less at this altitude as on the level below. In this vicinity, the only objects spared from the effects of the blast were limited to houses which were protected by hills. The question now arises, to what distance did the effects of the blast extend? We conducted our survey in 3 directions. At Tagani, 6 kilometers southeast, the ceilings were blown up and walls were cracked. At Futani, 9.5 kilometers, ceilings also were blown up and paper sliding doors broken. At Tome, 15 kilometers, paper and glass sliding doors were blown off and broken. At Isomichi-machi, a few window panes were broken at each house. However, evidences show that the blast was diverted by the mountains to a greater extent in this area than in others. It could be seen from the air that immediately after the Earth was hit by sudden heat of tremendous intensity, it was struck by an all-powerful blast, which blew past these seemingly unaffected houses, and after affecting everything it touched on its way, finally wound up in the sea.